Hello, my name is Devin, and I will be discussing Medusa with you today. My presentation will start off by telling you a little bit about who Medusa is, how she fits into the spectrum of monsters, and then I will discuss her story and what she symbolizes today. Medusa is the daughter of Phorcys and Ceto. She's one out of three Gorgon sisters, and the other two would be Snethno and Euryale. Only Medusa had been born beautiful and mortal, while the other two were immortal and monstrous. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, Medusa had been a beautiful maiden who caught the eye of Poseidon, and he could not resist her, so he raped her in the temple of Athena, and as punishment, Athena transformed her into the monster with snakes for hair, which is what most of us would know her as today. She ended up being killed by Perseus, and then her head would be used as a weapon and gifted back to Athena. She was so hideous and piercing that when men looked at her, they would turn into stone. And the image in the corner is the original image that Medusa was depicted as. Although there is not a ton of information on Medusa from ancient times, she is mentioned in Hesiod's Theogony, specifically her origin and death that was mentioned in the last slides. You can take a look at the image to the right, and that shows Perseus decapitating her. Her transformation is also mentioned in Ovid's Metamorphoses, which we will discuss a little later in the presentation. So a big question for me going into this research project was how Medusa fits into the spectrum of monsters. So we'll take a look at monsters in Greek mythology, how women monsters are typically portrayed, and how Medusa is portrayed as a monster. Monsters in Greek mythology can be broken down into 8 broad categories. This includes mythical monsters, mythical hybrids, mythical animals, dragons, giants, ghosts and demons, legendary creatures, and legendary tribes. Common traits that these monsters have would be they are often portrayed as scary or humanoid creatures, and they also combine human and animal forms, which is very similar to how Medusa is depicted. And here are some examples of some similar monsters in comparison to Medusa. So on the left we have the centaur, and on the right we have the minotaur, and we can see how they're combined with animals and pretty similar to Medusa being portrayed as a monster. Now, in regards to women monsters in literature, there seems to be a common theme on how they are portrayed. The quote I have here, said by Niall Scott, states that a free woman in an unfree society will be a monster. Basically, to me, this is saying that in a society where social roles and traditional sexual roles are bound, a woman who is free and doing what she wants will be demonized by that society. In addition to that, ugly women would not be bound to this society, since societies typically value traits like beauty, and within that they emphasize on the helplessness of women. Monstrosity separates female monsters because it distances them from society, singles them out, and they become freed of these bonds that societies have on them. Some examples of these female monsters could be vampires, tigresses, werewolves, and of course Medusa. They have become a lot more sexualized in stories, but that doesn't take away from them being monsters. By separating them from society, these monsters are able to find power and control, which is what makes them so scary and powerful. And then the image I have on the right is a new statue in New York City of Medusa holding Perseus's head, and I just thought that was pretty powerful, and I just thought it was cool, so I put it in the presentation. Now I have pulled up some stories of Medusa portrayed as a monster, and these are pretty commonly popular in our society. The one on the top is Medusa in Clash of the Titans in 1981. as you can see, she's a lot more scary than beautiful in this one. And then if you go down in the middle, again, we have Clash of the Titans in 2010, where she's made out to be much more beautiful. And then the bottom, which I'm sure a lot of people would be familiar with, is Percy Jackson holding Medusa's head as a weapon, and Percy Jackson the Lightning Thief. And she is much more modernized in this one. As you can see, she has sunglasses on to stop her from turning anyone into stone, even though her head has been decapitated already. The quote on the left is taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses, saying, "Along the way, in fields and by the roads, I saw on all sides men and animals, like statues turned to flinty stone at sight of dread Medusa's visage. Nevertheless, reflected on the brazen shield I bore upon my left, I saw her horrid face." So that's just kind of describing Medusa as a hideous monster, and that's also illustrates the top picture and the bottom picture from Clash of the Titans. That quote's said by Perseus when he went to fetch her head. The next question I had when starting my research of Medusa was what she symbolizes outside of being a mythical monster. Her story is much deeper than most in Greek mythology and much more relatable to women today. I think it's very important to be able to recognize her story more than a Greek tragedy, which is why I wanted to explore a little bit on how she symbolizes something much more and meaningful than just being a monster that we view her in today's society. The Metamorphosis discusses a lot on Medusa's transformation from a female maiden to a horrific monster. One could argue that Ovid is the original source that actually describes her transformation, that or it was just organically developed throughout time and throughout the centuries. Her relationship with transformation goes farther than just Ovid's description from maiden to a monster. Throughout the centuries, she has gone from being portrayed as an unfeminine beast to a beautiful woman. In earliest writings, she was just a scary head, as you can see in the bottom image. The introduction of Medusa does not drive out her monstrous identity. The introduction of her being beautiful doesn't drive out her monstrous identity. She's able to play the same role and can actually be more dangerous now as beautiful than her being just a hideous head, especially when you take into the threat of men. Ovid presents Medusa in two halves, which I have found this picture to illustrate for you. She's first seen as a beautiful maiden who attracts Poseidon. The second is her being a snaky-haired monster who petrifies anyone who meets her gaze. And then in between those two stages is her rape by Poseidon and her transition as punishment. With that, there's a double threat she holds, and the double threat would be attraction and petrification. In the end of her story, we always see her being decapitated, being the last violent act upon her, and Ovid then presents the birth of the Pegasus and Chrysaor, which is the result of Poseidon's actions. Now, with the rape of Medusa, is discussed for the first time by Ovid and really isn't brought up again until feminist writers took the story upon their own hands. I find a connection between that within our society because a lot of the time we brush aside dark stories like that because they can be controversial and uncomfortable. Medusa being a victim was completely brushed aside until feminists brought her story into the spotlight and made her a symbol for women in today's world. Modern day stories of Medusa really emphasize the horrors of Medusa's story and the trauma that rape victims can go through. Anne Stanford's modern day Medusa is similar to Ovid's in the sense that it has a beautiful girl turned into a dangerous monster, and then in between those stories, she was a rape victim. However, in Stanford's story, the rape is what transforms Medusa into the monster because she cannot control her rage based off of what happened to her, and in result, she begins she sees the world in stone as she transforms. So Medusa's story here is being used to represent the story of modern day women who a modern day woman who becomes a rape victim, and there are many other stories out there where Medusa helps women tell that story. To wrap this up, I would just like to go back over the fact that surface level we do see Medusa as a monster in society. However, we can see that from her traumas, she went from an unfree woman to a self-isolated free woman, um, who was able to find liberation, power, and control, making her extremely dangerous, especially to men. And then with that, her story makes her a powerful symbol for a modern day woman when it comes to going through trauma and coming out on the other side of that. And I do like the fact that we can use her story today to tell other stories and to emphasize the importance of some of those traumas. So that's why I think Medusa is pretty important to learn about. And lastly, you can take a look at my works cited. Here are all my sources where I got my research from, and then I did add a URL slide that just includes my images that I used. Thank you.